welcome back to another episode of Deep Quotes. I'm D.
I'm App.
I'm Pod.
And we have a quote today from what I'm going to refer to as Muga, Make Women Great Again. And the quote is, "Women today are being taught to act more like men. Where has that led us? Skyrocketing rates of divorce, depression, dysfunction, and America at the #1 spot in the world for single motherhood. No longer will you have to give in to toxic bullying feminist dogma and go against your ancient biological nature as a woman."
Well, this was clearly written by a man who is trying to understand the female experience, and by understand, I mean project onto females what he believes is the female experience.
I definitely agree with that.
Like, I empathize with his idea that women are being taught to act like men in terms of, like, there are things that are historically masculine and things that are historically feminine, and there is a push in general to blur those lines. And, like, possibly that is causing some negativity in women, but I think he's going a little too far here.
I think that in that aspect, and I realize that this is going to be an interesting episode just with us discussing it because I'm on the male part, so I kind of have to defend this. I don't have to, but I think the first part is absolutely correct. Feminism, paradoxically, is not trying to empower women. It's trying to have women act more like men. Hey, you should stand up for yourself. You should be aggressive. You should ask your boss for a raise. You should work for a living. These are things, like you mentioned, are historically masculine and things that men tended to do. What they're saying, what feminists tend to be saying is you can do every single thing that a man can do just as well as a man. That's the entire argument behind, like, the trans movement. Oh, there's no difference between men and women. Women are just as good at doing things that men have stereotypically been better at. So feminism, in its modern context, at the time of this recording, is about making women act more like men and not getting women to be treated equally to men or equally respected to men. It's not increasing feminization, which is what feminism would be doing, is saying you should be more feminine. It's saying be more masculine, and that is what feminism is. Do you disagree with that?
I kind of do, because in a lot of ways, I'm not going to be able to convince society to think of me differently. A great example of something that comes up a lot is women tend to be called bossy when they try to get people to do things and delegate work. But on the men's side, that's just the way it is. There's a lot of double standards there. And so from the women's side of acting more like a man, it gets us more of that respect. I'm not going to be able to teach you to give me respect unless I act in such a way that you think is worthy of respect in some ways.
So I think I understand where you're getting at, and I think it's the crux of why feminism in its modern context is wrong. Because what feminism is trying to do is say, you should respect all individual women. While I do believe that that is accurate, you should respect women, what feminism should be doing is say, respect femininity. And the feminist movement and the argument that this first argument is saying that what we're trying to do is make women act more like men and make that be acceptable. Like you were saying, oh, don't call women bossy when they're acting like
when they're doing their job.
By the way, I've definitely had bossy guys and referred to guys as being bossy and controlling. So I think, but trying to change the perspective of, oh, she's acting like a man, she's treating her the same way that you would treat a man that acts like that. I have no problem with that. I think that that's valid. They should be treated equally, but that's not what the role of feminism should be. The role of feminism should be, hey, for women that don't act like men, that's also just as acceptable, and you should treat them just as well.
And I can totally get behind that.
Yeah,
and that's what he's saying here.
Well, there's other context to the article that we'll have linked, where they also go into things like the conference that they're going to have. They want to have women have as many babies as they want, and they're talking about, like, women shouldn't be waiting until they're 30 to have kids. And so I think there is some context of, like,
but
what's meant by making women act more like men is making women forego reproduction and forego those things that are generally, and by generally I mean biologically, necessities of the human species.
Already, but you took both of those out of context. So, no, not out of context, but as an example, women should have as many babies as they want. If that amount is 0, he's advocating for having as many babies as you want.
But it's kind of implied that it's not 0.
But saying that, from the feminist movement, saying that women, you're just implying that women should have no babies. It's like, actually, in feminism, saying, yeah, abortion is good, right to choose is good, and if women don't want to have babies, that's perfectly fine, and it's good. Advocating for women not having babies is advocating for women acting more like men. And you're trying to change how women act, not change the perception on women acting feminine. And that's again, I think the problem that he's trying to talk to is feminism should defend femininity and not just try to turn women into men, and saying, hey, women, you shouldn't have children because you don't actually want to have women. That's just imposed on you by society. And so you should only have 0 children. He's saying women should be able to have as many children as they want, and that should be respected. Respecting the femininity and the miracle of being able to give birth is what he's advocating for.
And like, it's weird because it's coming from the perspective of like both sides are out of their mouths advocating in defense of and in like support of women.
Oh, absolutely.
And the way that they are going about it is opposite.
It's diametrically opposed.
That the modern feminist movement, generally speaking, tends to say women and men are more or less the same, that there are differences, obviously, but as much as is possible, let's equalize to the point where they're basically the same.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you say, Migwa?
Muga. Make women great again.
That they're more focusing on like where are the things that are different, and saying let's celebrate those differences.
Which is really ironic because I think that on the political left, saying everyone is the same and we need to treat everyone the same is is the opposite of what it should be, because you're saying, we need to bring in people of all types, but everyone is the same. Whereas the political right is saying we need to treat everyone the same because of their differences. And this is a perfect example of that. He's saying women are different. We should respect the fact that they're different and encourage them in that difference. I don't have to say that a woman is the same as a man in order to respect her. And if his perspective is that feminism has been trying to turn women into men, that's why he's saying, let's make women great again. Because he is someone that I think this group has an appreciation for femininity and the value of femininity and women as a whole. And so trying to restore women to being their own section and their own greatness is what he's trying to do.
Well, yeah, they like women because the entire panel and group doing this is made up entirely of men.
That's
right.
fair. It was exclusively men, and I'm guessing straight men.
And the rest of this quote saying like skyrocketing rates of divorce, depression, dysfunction, like that alone to me is like, well, yeah, in the past, women weren't allowed to really speak out about problems they were having at home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, well, actually, we were really focusing on the first part of this. With regards to divorce, like, the divorce rates have actually been falling a lot. The reason why they even jumped up as high as they did was the second that divorce was made socially acceptable, people that were in long-standing marital strife were like, cool, I can divorce this guy, and they weren't going to make the same mistake again, or at least weren't going to make it.
And they parted ways, which meant that briefly the divorce rate just skyrocketed. Mm-hmm. It's been slowly tapering off as people are not really getting into those relationships as much.
Yeah, and it's also that like your likelihood of getting a divorce is much higher if you've previously had a divorce. So as that first generation of people that were really getting divorces back in the 70s and 80s, as they are more exiting the marital pool, so to speak.
That's a nice way of putting it.
The rates are dropping. And like depression and dysfunction and whatever, like everyone's dealing with that. We don't really know why, but there's a lot of stressors in the modern world.
It's becoming more publicized.
And but I will agree with at least his comment about single motherhood. Like that's something that should be curbed. But I don't necessarily think that that's a woman problem. I think that that is a societal problem that we're not necessarily telling boys, hey, if you get a woman pregnant, like,
You need to stick around.
you are not allowed to just walk out on her, because it's not fair to the baby, and it's really like, if you're just going to be paying her money, like, you may as well get something out of it and get to spend time with your child.
Now, I will say this with regards to that. On their website, they also mention, we live in an age where men and fathers are treated like trash by an entire culture. That modern feminism is not just trying to say that women can act like men and that women should act like men. It's saying that masculinity is toxic. The entire term toxic masculinity is being warped into the idea that masculinity is in itself is bad, and that fathers are bad, and that generally speaking, if you have a court case where you're trying to decide custody ownership, the woman almost always gets it because, oh, well, the guy is probably at fault, and toxic masculinity. And so when you treat your fathers like trash, that's going to contribute to, like you mentioned earlier, single motherhood. If we're saying men are bad, hey, you're going to have a baby, well, it's okay that the man isn't there because men are bad, which is increasing the single motherhood rate. And granted, it's
complicated, right? So,
Yeah.
like, there's the side of it that women are not really respecting the men that they are allowing to impregnate them. I think it's also that we're not socially enforcing the idea that, like, it does take two parents to raise a child.
Mm-hmm.
And so guys are given kind of the green light of, like, oh, if your woman starts going a little crazy when she's pregnant because the hormones are messing with her brain, and she tells you to get out, then guess what? You don't have to fight for her anymore. If she's nice, she will put father unknown on the birth certificate, and you're completely, scot-free. That's not your child. You don't have to care about your child. You can go get another woman pregnant.
Mm-hmm. And this, a section of the culture of our society, or at least the U.S. society, that really suffers from this is the black community.
Well, any inner city. Like, let's open it up just a little bit.
Sure. The reason I use the black community is because there actually are statistics to back that up, that it's the single mother, or the fatherlessness, the percentage of households that are a child without a father in the home is something like 70%.
That sounds about right.
It's ridiculously high, much higher than really any other subset of culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's largely because masculinity is viewed as, oh, it's bad. It's okay to be a single mother, and it's empowering to be a single mother. And within that culture, you have people saying, oh, you knocked her up, get the hell out of there.
Yeah,
you don't want to be responsible for payments, just disappear.
Like, but I think that that's more a thing to the men of like, we need to be telling them, like, hey, if a woman finds out that you have a baby mama walking around there, she should not date you if you're not taking care of that kid, because all that's saying is, hey, if I get you pregnant, then I'm not going to take care of this kid either. Like, I think that there is some, I don't want to call it public shaming, but that's probably what it is, that needs to be done kind of on both sides of those issues, where it's like, hey, both of you guys made a mistake. Now, clearly, there are times where there needs to be a single mother when, like, the man was beating her. Obviously, get out. I don't want to see you. But generally speaking, like, if you're going to get someone pregnant, like, you need to stick around. Maybe not in a romantic relationship, but you need to stick around and stay with that kid.
Absolutely. And I think that, interestingly, the feminist solution to this is, oh, the guy ran out, abort the baby. Which is, if having a baby is something that only women can do, having a baby is feminist in regards to it being a feminine feature. So saying, oh, a guy did something bad, you should eliminate a feminist aspect of yourself by killing the baby. The better solution, or I think the more feminist solution, would be shaming all men who run out on the women. If you want to solve the problem of single parenthood, shame the men and make them cultural exiles to the point of, look, you have a baby, you are going to be there to support her. If the decision is still, no, we are not ready for a baby, and we collectively decide not to have this baby, okay, look at our abortion discussion, because we talk a lot about abortion in the abortion topic. But again, it would be more feminist to say that men should respect the femininity of having a child rather than say it's feminist to have an abortion. Well, that is, by definition, anti-feminist.
It is a core tenet of like being the non-toxic version of masculinity to love and support your children and the mother of your children. So men ducking out on that responsibility is actively them partaking in the toxic form of masculinity, which is the I get to spread my seed wherever, and not the positive form of it, which is I get to raise up the next generation and provide stability into this family.
Which has historically been mostly what women do, is raising the children, which is the end part of his quote, go against your ancient biological nature as a woman, that women have historically been the ones to take care of children.
Yeah, and men historically have been the ones to take care of the women.
Yes.
Because a woman taking care of a child is really not able to take care of herself as well. Like, I realize that women can, and there are certainly many single mothers out there, and I'm not trying to deride anyone, but like,
it's hard.
It's hard enough to take care of yourself if you're a single person. If you're a single person with a small child, you have no life.
And this is something that I've heard, again, Jordan Peterson talk about fairly frequently, is the idea of toxic masculinity. It's like, you want to have an example of good masculinity, and you're in a married relationship or in a difficult relationship. The woman takes care of the child. Your job as a husband is to take care of the woman. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have any obligation to the child, but you as a man should be supporting women. That is good masculinity, is fighting to protect women, which historically, particularly in regards to men fighting wars, the reason you fight a war is to try to protect your homeland, try to protect your children, and try to protect the women. Women and children first. It's in that is positive masculinity, is protecting women and protecting children, and
getting the people out of Dodge that are not able to defend themselves when you know, the wolves come in, make a body barrier.
And would you agree that it is very feminist to be as aggressive as possible in protecting women, defending them,
I think,
and supporting? I
think that there is kind of a weirdness with the word defending, because defending can mean, hey,
you're inferior.
We're trying to keep you safe, and we're trying to do what's good for you and what is actually useful. Or it could mean you are a lesser being that needs defending because you are physically incapable of taking care of it.
Can I rephrase?
Sure.
Men have I would say, an inherent drive to support and sacrifice for the sake of women. That is an example of positive masculinity, the willingness to sacrifice for and support women.
And I like the word support there better, but sacrifice is also important because men tend to be the ones who put themselves in the line of fire.
Yeah.
Quite literally, yes.
Which, I mean, that's from a biological perspective, like, you don't need very many men to pass on the species. You need a lot of women.
Right. So women, in some regards, in their childbearing capabilities, are more valuable than men. But that assumes that women are different than men. You have to make that assumption and saying, hey, women have the ability to have children. Women tend to like children more than men, which is why women tend to,
women not only have the children, women also take care of the children until the children can take care of themselves.
Just look at like daycare facilities and nurses and basically people that are taking care of children in societies where it's a choice what profession you want to do. Women tend to be the ones that work in humanities and particularly around children rather than men. And it's not to say that no men like doing that. There are a lot of men that like doing that, but it is significantly skewed towards women doing it. And that's not bad. That's good. We should support women in that decision. If women want to have children and work with children, what Muga is trying to advocate for is encourage that. Encourage women to do whatever they want, and don't say, oh, to be feminist, you shouldn't be having a child. It's empowering to have an abortion. It's empowering to not have children. It's like, but if that's what a woman wants to do, women should be able to do what they want to do. They should be able to have as many babies as they want. And that's why I brought up earlier, he's not saying you should have babies. He's saying women should have as many babies as they want because generally speaking, they are predisposed to wanting more children than men. And there's nothing wrong with that.
I think it was just that it's coming through the lens of a man trying to say what women want.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So that's kind of more of the bigger problem versus specifically the words he's saying of like as many as you want.
Mm-hmm.
There was a slight implication of like as many as you want means you can have 1 to 5, not if you don't want to
0.
have any, that's cool too.
But that is his way of being supportive to women.
I think that their heart is in the right place. I think that they are
I think some of the
misguided.
wording
Yeah.
is definitely off.
But is that just because we're used to hearing feminist ideology of, oh, you can do everything a man can do, rather than what women can do is even differently than men is just as valuable and potentially more valuable than men. He's taking an ideology that we just aren't used to hearing. We're used to hearing women should act like men. And so when we hear something like women acting as women stereotypically do is good, that sounds sexist to say. I don't think it actually is sexist.
I don't
It
think
just
so
sounds sexist.
either. A lot of it is just the wording. I've always taken it as women should be allowed to do whatever they want. If it's to act more like men, be my guest. If it's to be, taking care of all the children, you are more than welcome to do that too.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the problem here is kind of his wording, the way it's coming through this lens.
Mhm.
Also the make women great again. That does not jive so well with me because of all the other cultural things that go along with a statement like
Sure,
that.
sure. Well, it implies that women are less great than they used to be.
Right. There's also the association with Trump that goes into it. And typically when I think of male Trump supporters, they are not the men I want to be associated with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, again, I think his heart is in, the group's heart is in the right place. I think that there is some things that they could adjust, especially as it relates to men's role in setting this up for women.
Absolutely.
Going back to the single motherhood thing, like, you can't have a single mother if you don't also have some, I would call him many, many bad words, but some idiots.
Single motherhood is generally speaking not about the mothers so much as it is about shitty fathers.
Yeah.
It's about some guy that just walked out on his responsibility, maybe is sending a check, and like part of that is women. Seriously, if you are in a relationship with a man who has a child and does not spend time with that child, unless the woman specifically has told him to stay away, you run away from that man as fast as you can.
Absolutely.
Because he's going to treat you the same way, and it's not cool.
Yep. Absolutely.
And men, if you have friends that are like that, run.
No.
They're not not
no,
run.
Don't
but
run.
So, like, yell at him.
Yes. That's where the cultural shaming aspect comes in, is if you see someone acting in a toxic way, in a way that is anti-cultural, tell them about it and be like, hey, I noticed that you have a kid. You seem like a pretty crappy person for not supporting that kid who is yours. And the mom is really struggling and you're not doing anything for either of them. And again, we're not talking about instances where like the father died or something
instances
along
where
those
there
lines.
was abuse.
It's where you're choosing to not be in that life. So yeah, I think it's arguable that feminism and specifically feminazism has gone so far towards saying that men are bad and but women acting like men or acting in stereotypically masculine ways are good, that the Overton window is so far in that direction that even saying something like women tend to like children is viewed as sexist towards women, even though it's like, but there's thousands of years of evolution, and everywhere in the animal kingdom, it's like, yeah, generally speaking, the women are the ones that are caring for the children. How is that sexist? And supporting women in that endeavor is, I would say, the true feminist ideology of support femininity. Don't turn femininity into masculinity and say that you're a feminist. You're not a feminist. You're a masculinist. Ooh, I like that term.
And you just talking about feminazis reminds me of the news stories of the various women coming out and saying like, oh, if I find out I'm having a male child, I'm going to abort it because I don't want to add any more men to the world. And
yeah,
like,
it's
no,
anti-men.
Like there's people that have that idea. And so like this as opposed to that is not nearly as like radical. But this as opposed to the majority of feminist movement is a bit radical. But we do have to keep in consideration the fact that there is that complete opposite of men are completely horrible and I won't allow them in my body at all. Except how'd you get pregnant?
Yeah. And like we've been saying, I think it really comes down to femininity or feminism should not be anti-men.
Right. I can agree with that.
And do you agree that it should not be saying women should be men?
Yes.
Because that's the exact opposite, saying, oh, all men are bad. And the opposite of that is women should be men, which ironically, in terms of feminazis, they're teaching both of those. Women should be men, but men are bad. It's like, what do you want? And this, while it is on the far opposite of the spectrum of let's just support femininity and say that that's good, it's so far out of the Overton window because feminism has been going rampant for decades now that the Overton window is so far away that this, while it could be considered normal, sounds ridiculously fringe because we're not used to it. And I think that this is a push to make pro-femininity more mainstream. And I think that that's where he's coming from with Make Women Great Again. Not necessarily make women great again, but make femininity great again.
I can see that. The wording could definitely be better if that's actually what he's going for.
But it sounds like both of your problems are with this particular instance is the wording and not the ideas.
I think the wording and like the harshness of the language. I mean,
sure.
Things like saying skyrocketing rates of divorce when it's like, well, that's not exactly what's going on here.
It's a little exaggerative,
hyperbolic.
maybe. Yeah.
And this is for a women's conference. If you're trying to get me to go to a women's conference with this quote, I'm not going.
That's fair. In which case, if your goal is to make positive change, you need to word it in a way that it can actually manifest itself as positive change. Doesn't matter how good your ideas are if you can't communicate them properly.
Yep.
So. Any other comments on this article?
I think I'm good here.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Let us know what you think in the comments. We'll see you guys next time.
Hi everyone. Thanks so much for listening to this discussion. Your interest really means a lot to us. If you want to help support this podcast and our goal of sparking discussions and bringing people together, check out how to contribute in the description. Happy deeping!
The content of this podcast does not reflect the views and opinions held by anyone involved. We will frequently be playing the devil's advocate strictly for the purpose of exploration of ideas and not as an endorsement of any subsequent action. We condemn all acts of violence other than those of self-defense against physical harm.